The story you were taught is that ancient life was a grind. Every waking hour spent clawing food out of a hostile world, always one bad day from starving. The story is wrong. The people who lived that way often had their food secured before the sun was halfway across the sky and more free time than you will have this week. The grind is not the old thing. The grind is the new one, and it arrived with the farm. To see why, you have to drop the word primitive and pick up a stopwatch. In 1966, a room full of anthropologists met in Chicago for a conference called Man the Hunter. One of them, Marshall Sahlins, looked at the new field data and said something that broke the old picture. He called hunter-gatherers the original affluent society. Not affluent because they owned much, affluent because they needed little and got it fast. For centuries, the assumption had run the other way. Life before farming was supposed to have been, in the famous phrase, nasty, brutish, and short. A constant emergency lived at the edge of death. Sahlins was not offering a nicer opinion. He was pointing at data. When people went out and actually timed foraging societies, the emergency was not there. The hours were short, the food was steady, and the leftover time was long. The numbers behind that claim came mostly from one man with a scale and a notebook. Richard Lee spent the 1960s living with the Juhwansi, a foraging people in the Kalahari, weighing their food and counting their hours. His finding, getting enough food took about 12 to 19 hours a week. Not a day, a week. Sahlins put it in banking terms, hunters keep bankers' hours. But here is what that number hides, and it matters. Lee counted the time spent getting food. He did not count the time spent turning it into a meal. Add the cracking, the cooking, the mending of tools, the fetching of water and wood, and the week fills out to something closer to 44.5 hours for the men and 40.1 for the women. That is not a life of endless leisure. It is a full week of effort, a week that looks a lot like a modern one, once the commute and the chores are added on top of the job. If they still put in a full week, then where is the difference? It is not in the number of hours. It is in the shape of them. A study published in 2021 measured how much energy foraging people actually burn getting food, and it was not small. They walk long distances. They dig hard for roots buried deep in dry ground. The body of a hunter-gatherer is not resting through the day. It is a working machine, running hot for the hours it runs. They were not lazy, they were not idle. This is the first thing the old picture got backwards. The problem with a hunter-gatherer's day was never that it was easy. It was hard, physical, and skilled, but it had a ceiling. Effort went in, food came out, and once the food was enough, the effort had nowhere left to go. A factory can always run another shift. A field always has more rows. A body that has already caught its dinner has, quite simply, finished, and then they stopped. That is the part your world deleted. When the food for the day was in, the work ended not at a whistle, not at 5 o'clock, but at enough. A woman who had dug enough roots by midday did not keep digging. Why would she? There was nowhere to put the surplus. Food she could not carry would rot before it was eaten. No one was banking her hours, and no one owned the roots she left in the ground. The work had a stopping point built into the world itself. The moment need was met, the work was done. And here is where it gets stranger. What she gathered was not only hers. In a foraging band, food moved. The good hunter fed the unlucky one on the understanding that next season the debt would run the other way. Hoarding made no sense, and neither did overworking to build a pile. You cannot bank a dead antelope. The sun crossing the sky was the only clock, and by early afternoon it had already set enough. Something removed that stopping point. It was not a change in the weather, and it was not a new set of tools. It was a decision made in a handful of places around 12,000 years ago to stop moving and to plant. Farming looks like progress, and in one way it is. It pulls more food from less land, and it feeds more people. But per person, per hour, it was a bad trade, and the bones record it. When one group in what is now Illinois shifted to intensive farming, their skeletons kept the receipt. Life expectancy fell from about 26 years to 19. Iron deficiency anemia rose fourfold. Signs of infection tripled. One anthropologist called the move to agriculture the worst mistake in the history of the human race. He was overstating it. He was not making it up. Here is the mechanism underneath. A field does not let you stop at enough. A field has to be cleared, planted, weeded, guarded, and harvested on its schedule, not yours. The grain it produces can be stored, which means, for the first time, surplus is worth building, and stored surplus can be counted, owned, taxed, and taken. The stopping point that was built into foraging is simply gone. In its place is a new rule. More is always better because more can finally be kept. With the field came a whole set of familiar tools. A calendar because the planting could not wait. A storeroom because the harvest had to last the year. And eventually a number written down. What was owed, what was owned, what one person could demand from another. The old rule of sharing became the new rule of debt. Time itself was cut into owed and unowed, into work and not work, a line no forager had ever needed to draw. Once that rule started running, there was no reverse gear. More food meant more people. More people meant more mouths, which meant more field, which meant more work. The farmers outbred the foragers and pushed them to the dry edges of the map. Not because farming was the better life, but because farming was a one-way door. They did not walk into this because it looked better. Each small step made sense on its own. A little more food, a little more safety, a few more children who lived. The trap only closed slowly, over generations, one ratchet click at a time, until there was no version of the old life left to return to. This is the reversal that the anthropologist James Sussman has spent whole books on. Across the 300,000 years of being human, the person who spends most of their waking life working is not the ancient one. It is you. The 40-hour week is not the deep human baseline, worn smooth by evolution. It is a recent setting, roughly 12,000 years old, installed on top of a much older machine. Think of it as an operating system. The forager's mind runs an older one, with a command written deep in the code. When you have enough, stop. Farming did not delete that command. It just built a machine that never reports back that enough has been reached. Be clear about one thing, so this does not curdle into a fantasy. The foraging life was not a paradise, and you should not want it back. Infants died often. A bad season could empty a camp. Some anthropologists have spent years pointing at the darker side the Affluent Society story leaves out. Fewer hours did not mean an easy life. It meant a different one, with its own hard edges. But the old machine did not go anywhere. It is running in you right now. You woke to an alarm because a clock, not your body, now decides when your work begins. You spend your day building surplus you cannot eat. Hours banked, money stored, numbers that are supposed to keep going up. And underneath all of it sits a quiet, specific feeling you can never quite switch off. The sense that there is not enough time, that you have not done enough, that you should probably still be working. That feeling is not a flaw in you. It is not weakness, and it is not laziness. It is friction between two machines. A brain built to stop at enough, and a world built so that enough never arrives. Look at the shape of your own week. You call 2 days in 7 a reward and give the machine the other 5. You take a vacation and feel a low guilt the whole time, as if resting were something to be repaid. You measure a day by how much you produced, not by whether you had enough. None of that is human nature. All of it is roughly 12,000 years old. Your ancestor set her digging stick down in the early afternoon because the world still gave her a place to stop. Your world took that place away and never handed it back. The grind you feel is real. It is just not ancient. It is a mind built to finish its work by the time the sun is halfway across the sky, still waiting, long after dark, for a day that no longer knows how to end.